She bent to pick up a coin, a single scuffed quarter lost beneath a booth. And in that split second, the man at the next table paused mid-sentence. His eyes locked on her, not with judgment, but with an intensity that felt almost reverent. He was supposed to be invisible to her, just another customer with an expensive watch and a carefully tailored silence. But something about her humility, her precision, her quiet grace, held him captive. Why would a billionaire freeze over something so small? What secret had he just seen in a waitress? Elena rose from the tiled floor with the coin in her hand, her apron brushing lightly against her thighs as she tucked the strange token into its pocket. The fluorescent lights above flickered once. Just once. But it was enough to make her pause. She glanced around the diner, the clatter of plates, the hiss of the coffee machine, the sharp ring of a bell from the kitchen. Everything pulsed with the rhythm of routine, but something in the air felt different, like a violin string pulled taut, humming with tension just before the bow makes contact. She scanned the booths quickly. Nothing unusual. The usual customers. A tired mother with a stroller. An older couple silently sharing pie. 2 college kids lost in their laptops. Then her eyes flicked to the far corner booth, where a man in a charcoal suit sat with his back straight and his hands folded neatly on the table. She barely registered him beyond noting his expensive-looking watch and the untouched espresso before him. She had seen his type before. Quiet, composed, cold, as winter money. A businessman waiting for a meeting. Nothing more. She turned back to her station, shaking off the strange buzz in her chest like a shiver not yet formed. The diner didn't slow down. Not for her, not for anyone. Table 7 needed a refill. Table 9 wanted extra lemon. The dishwasher was behind again. And her manager was already giving her that raised eyebrow look that meant, move faster. But still, even as she moved through the motions, pouring coffee, wiping crumbs, smiling that smile she wore like armor, something kept tugging at the edge of her awareness. A static charge in the air. Like she was being watched, not leered at but truly seen, in a way that made her skin warm and her spine straighten. But whenever she turned her head, there was only the usual noise. A fleeting thought passed through her. Maybe I'm just tired. She'd barely slept the night before, a late shift turning into an early one, and her feet had started aching an hour ago. Still, as she reached for the ketchup bottle left crooked on a counter, her fingers brushed the token in her pocket, and the engraved metal sparked a small chill up her arm. Just a coin, she told herself. Just a long day. She had bills to pay, groceries to buy, and a cracked phone screen she couldn't afford to fix. There was no time for strange feelings, let alone mysteries. She chalked it all up to caffeine and sleep deprivation, shook her head softly, and went back to work. Never knowing that in the corner booth, Cole Harrington had watched the entire moment unfold, and he hadn't blinked once. Cole Harrington sat in the booth like a man pretending to be present, nodding absently as his assistant rattled off numbers and schedules in a low, clipped tone. The sleek tablet between them displayed profit margins, pending acquisitions, and calendar blocks filled with meetings Cole didn't remember agreeing to. But his eyes weren't on the screen. They were fixed just beyond his assistant's shoulder, drawn again and again to the waitress in the pale blue uniform, her name tag slightly crooked, her hair pinned up in a rushed twist that left wisps dancing near her jawline. She moved with a kind of quiet efficiency that fascinated him, not rushed, not panicked, just deliberate. Her hands were quick but precise, and her face held none of the performative charm he saw in people who wanted something from him. She wasn't performing at all. She was surviving. And yet there was something graceful in that survival, like a dancer unaware she was still dancing. "Mr. Harrington." The assistant's voice pierced the moment. Cole blinked, a breath catching in his throat. He shifted his gaze slowly, almost reluctantly, toward the screen. "You asked about the Union Heights property," the assistant prompted, tapping the map. "We need to finalize before the end of the week." Cole nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. Union Heights. This diner was in that district. He hadn't come here for business. Not really. Not at first. The truth he didn't admit, even to himself, was that he'd walked in one rainy afternoon on impulse, a rare and irrational detour between meetings, and since then he'd returned 3 times. Always the same time of day. Always when the light was at its softest, just before the sun dipped below the city's skyline, and always when she was working, Elena. He didn't know her name until last time, when another waitress called out to her. The sound of it had stayed with him, echoing strangely in his mind, like a melody half-remembered. He watched her now, as she bent to pick up a napkin that had drifted from a child's table, the movement fluid, unconscious. There was no pretense to her, and that unsettled him more than any boardroom negotiation. It stirred something buried, something that made him feel younger, raw, and far more exposed than he liked. His assistant sighed and tapped her pen against the tablet. Should I move the summit call or not? He didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked once more to Elena, who was laughing softly with a customer. Just a sliver of a smile. Brief and real. Cole looked away quickly, jaw tightening. "Push it," he said at last. "Next week." The assistant blinked, surprised. Cole Harrington never delayed. But he was no longer thinking about schedules. He was thinking about a girl who moved like silence and sadness and strength, and wondering why he couldn't stop seeing her, when the entire world usually disappeared the second he blinked. The kitchen was a chorus of chaos. Orders barked out, plates clattering, the fryer spitting oil like it had a grudge. Steam fogged the corners of the tiny prep space, as Elena slid through it all like breath through a crack in the door, balancing 3 plates on one arm and wiping sweat from her temple with the back of her wrist. Her ponytail had come partially undone, strands sticking to her neck, but she didn't have a second to fix it. Not when Table 4 had sent back their pancakes because they were too golden, and Table 9 wanted their eggs runny, but not too runny, and the dishwasher was once again broken, forcing everyone to stack dirty plates like a Jenga tower by the sink. "You know, if I had a face like yours, I'd marry rich and get the hell out of here," said Tanya, another waitress, grinning over her shoulder as she grabbed a pot of coffee. Elena snorted softly, not bothering to look up. "What does that even mean?" "It means," Tanya said, eyeing the floor manager through the little round window in the door, "you've got that soft, tragic thing going on, like a Hallmark movie, but sadder. It's catnip for rich guys." Elena rolled her eyes and plated a slice of pie with practiced grace. "Tragic girls still gotta pay rent, Tan." Tanya sing-songed. "Tell that to Mr. Tall, dark, and serious in your section again." Elena paused mid-reach. "What?" "Table 16, that guy in the suit. Cole something. I had him once. Never says much. Tips weird. Smells like pine and money. He asked if you were working today." Elena blinked. "Seriously?" Tanya gave her a sly grin. "He even waited 5 minutes to be seated so he could sit in your section. Doesn't strike me as the wait-around type. Better be careful. Next thing you know, you'll be sipping champagne out of a leather briefcase." "Ew," Elena muttered, half laughing. "Why would someone like him care where he sits?" Tanya shrugged, her earrings swaying. "Maybe he likes the view." Elena shook her head, pushing back through the swinging kitchen door with a tray balanced on her hand. She didn't have time for fantasies. Maybe he did ask for her. Maybe he didn't. It didn't matter. Rich people came and went in this part of the city all the time, flickering in and out of working-class worlds, like ghosts with black cards. And even if he did look at her, it didn't mean anything. People looked all the time. They looked right through you. She slid the plates onto table 5. and smiled, like she meant it. But as she turned, she felt it again. That weight, that pause in the air. From the corner booth, Cole watched her. She didn't see him. Not really. Not yet. But still, something inside her shifted. Like a song just beginning to stir from silence. The apartment was quiet in the way only second-floor walk-ups could be, where the hum of the fridge and the distant echo of late-night traffic filled the silence without ever breaking it. Elena dropped her keys in the chipped ceramic bowl by the door and let her bag slump to the floor like a tired body. Her shoes came off next, one then the other, leaving faint indentations on the worn rug as she padded toward the closet. She didn't know why she was opening it. Maybe it was the look that man had given her again, or Tanya's teasing words echoing like a dare in her head. Whatever it was, her fingers felt numb as they reached up to the high shelf, brushing aside an old winter scarf and a crumpled grocery bag until they closed around the leather handle. She pulled the violin case down gently, the dust blooming in the slanted kitchen light like tiny ghosts. It creaked as it opened, reluctant, heavy with years. Inside lay the violin, nestled in fading velvet, the wood still glossy though dulled with time. The bow sat beside it like an old companion, frayed slightly at the grip. She reached out, hesitated, then let her fingers trace the curve of the instrument's body, and in an instant, the air in the room changed. She was no longer 26 and exhausted. She was 10, barefoot on the carpet in her mother's living room, the soft scent of lavender and old sheet music in the air. Her dress was too long, the sleeves falling past her wrists, but she stood tall with the violin tucked beneath her chin. Across the room, her mother sat in the armchair, smiling like sunlight through gauze. Again, she'd say gently, but this time, feel it. Don't just play the notes, breathe them. And Elena did. She closed her eyes and drew the bow across the strings, the first halting notes trembling out like baby birds learning to fly. The melody wobbled, faltered, then rose, her small body swaying as she gave it everything she had. Her mother clapped when she finished, laughing through tears. That's it, my love. That's your voice. The memory faded like morning fog, and the present snapped back into place. Elena sat down slowly, the violin resting on her lap like a secret she wasn't ready to carry again. After her mother died, suddenly, cruelly, a stroke that took her mid-sentence at the kitchen table. Elena had put the violin away. She hadn't played since the funeral. Couldn't. Every note felt like an echo of something lost. And yet, she didn't close the case this time. She left it open on the table, staring at it as if it might start playing itself. Outside, the city sighed through her window. Inside, she sat in the dimness, the weight of silence pressing in. And somewhere in her chest, something forgotten began to stir. Not loud, not urgent, just present. A single string, tightening, waiting. The morning rush had barely let up by the time Elena found herself reaching into her apron for a pen and pulling out something entirely unexpected. At first, she thought it was the same quarter she'd picked up the day before, the one she'd found near table 12, the one she never bothered to remove. But as her fingers rolled it across her palm, a strange chill bloomed in her fingertips. This wasn't a quarter, not even close. It was heavier, thicker, and oddly smooth to the touch. She turned it over, her brows pinching. One side bore no numbers, no presidents, just a minimalist design, a faint swirling pattern etched into the surface like waves or smoke. But the other side, she froze. There, in careful engraved script, were the words, "Value lies in the unseen." Her throat tightened. The diner buzzed around her, a blur of silverware, shouted orders, and the dull scrape of chairs. But she didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at the coin like it might whisper something if she held it long enough. Where had this come from? She was certain this wasn't what she had picked up off the floor yesterday. Wasn't it just a plain coin? Her memory felt smudged now, unreliable around the edges. Elena looked around the room, suddenly hyper-aware. Tanya was at the coffee station. The cook slammed a plate onto the pass-through window. A couple left without finishing their toast. And at the corner booth, Cole Harrington sat again, alone. His espresso, untouched as usual, but his eyes were on her. Not in a hungry, entitled way. Not like the glances she'd learned to dodge from drunk businessmen and bored lawyers. His gaze was still, like watching rain on glass. Calm, but intent. She quickly turned away, heart suddenly thudding too hard in her chest. She slipped the coin back into her apron as if it burned. It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. Maybe it was a prank, a trick. Tanya playing games. But something in her gut told her no. This was intentional, meaningful, even if she didn't know why yet. And it unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She tried to focus on her tasks, refilling creamers, resetting booths, but her thoughts kept slipping back to the engraving. Value lies in the unseen. The words felt like they were meant for her, like someone had looked inside her and carved a message into metal. She didn't believe in signs. She barely believed in luck anymore. Life had taught her that what you don't see can break you. But still, as she moved through the familiar motions of her shift, the coin weighed heavily in her pocket, tugging at her like an anchor made of questions. And across the diner, Cole's gaze never wavered. The bell above the diner door gave its usual tired jingle, but Elena didn't look up right away. She was mid-pour on a table's third coffee refill and focused on not spilling. It wasn't until she caught a brief hush in the din, an imperceptible shift, like a held breath passing through the room, that she glanced toward the entrance. There he was again. Cole Harrington. Perfectly tailored charcoal suit, rain-dark hair, eyes like storm glass and just as unreadable. He stood still for a beat too long, as if listening for something before he moved, then made his way to the back corner, his corner now, with the same quiet certainty as before. She watched him sit without asking for a menu, without even waiting for a server to greet him, as if the routine had already been set, as if the script had already been written. And maybe it had. He sat straighter than most, like someone used to having space around him, not because he demanded it, but because the world instinctively gave it to him. Still, there was something different this time. His gaze wasn't just observant, it was searching. Elena couldn't put her finger on it, but he looked heavier. Somehow, like he had arrived looking for something he'd misplaced, not in the physical world, but somewhere inside himself. She grabbed the pot of coffee and moved toward his table, each step measured, her pulse betraying her cool. She felt the coin in her apron pocket. Still there, like it had grown roots into her fabric, into her. As she approached, he glanced up. Their eyes met. No smile, no small talk, just a pause that lasted a moment too long. "Same as usual?" she asked, her voice casual but a bit tighter than she'd intended. He nodded once. "Please." His voice was low and even, like someone used to being obeyed but too tired to command. She poured the coffee. He didn't look at the cup, only at her hands, then at her eyes again. She walked away, feeling his gaze stay behind like a fingerprint pressed against her spine. At the server station, Tanya leaned in. "5th time in 2 weeks. You keeping count yet?" Elena didn't respond. She didn't know how to explain what she was feeling. That strange disquiet, that weight pressing against her ribs every time he walked in. It wasn't attraction. Not exactly. It was recognition. Like standing across from someone in a dream and knowing you've never met. And yet, you have. Cole didn't pull out his phone. Didn't open a laptop. He just sat, eyes flicking occasionally toward the window, then back to her, like he was comparing the present to some lost version of it he couldn't find again. The diner bustled on. Orders called. Dishes clanked. Lives passed by. But in that booth, time stretched. Cole wasn't watching her like a man fascinated by beauty. He watched her like a man trying to remember something important, something he feared he might never recover. By the end of her shift, Elena could no longer pretend it was coincidence. It was the fourth time in 10 days, always around the same hour. 3:15 p.m. Give or take a few minutes. Always the same table. Always the same drink. Espresso, untouched. And always the same silence, like the world outside ceased to exist for him the moment he walked through the door. She'd tried to ignore it, told herself he was just another creature of habit. There were plenty. The old man who only ordered apple pie and sat by the window. The woman who read paperback thrillers while slowly demolishing a stack of onion rings. But this was different. This wasn't routine. This was intentional. There was too much stillness to it, too much awareness. And now it was starting to crawl under her skin like a song stuck between chords. During the lull before dinner, she caught her manager, George, a gruff man with soft eyes, counting inventory at the back. She approached casually, towel slung over her shoulder. "Hey, do you know who that guy is?" she asked, nodding toward the booth without naming names. George didn't even look up. "The one in the suit?" "Yeah, quiet. Espresso guy. Cole Harrington." He said it like it meant something. Elena frowned. "Should I know that name?" George did look up then, one eyebrow raised. "You live in this city and don't. Man owns half the skyline. Real estate tycoon. Harrington Group. They built the Solis Tower, that eco high-rise in the Harbor District." Elena blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, that's Cole Harrington." "Mm-hmm." George scribbled something on his clipboard. "Used to be on all the magazine covers a few years back. Big deal in development. Then poof, disappeared from the media. No scandals, just stopped showing up. Reclusive, but still powerful. Like if Batman did zoning permits." Elena couldn't help but laugh under her breath, but it came out laced with disbelief. "And now he's drinking lukewarm espresso at a booth in our greasy spoon?" George shrugged. "Some rich folks get tired of 5-star service. Maybe he likes the salt and grit. Or maybe..." He looked at her with meaning. "Maybe he's not here for the coffee." Elena scoffed and looked away, uncomfortable. "Please. Guys like that don't see girls like me." George returned to his clipboard. "Maybe not, but he stares like he does." That left her quiet. She went back to wiping counters, but her mind was tangled. A billionaire, sitting in the corner of her barely surviving diner, day after day. No entourage, no fanfare, just her. Watching her. Why? The question looped in her chest, unanswered, as the last of the afternoon light spilled golden and slanted across the booth where Cole Harrington sat. Still, silent, and seeing far more than he let on. The dinner crowd was beginning to trickle in, loosening the quiet tension that always lingered between the lunch rush and the evening din, when the front door creaked open and a soft jingle announced the arrival of one of Elena's favorite regulars, Mr. Calden. White-haired, well-creased, and always dressed like someone who used to wear bow ties out of habit, made his slow but determined way to his usual table by the window. He walked with a cane now, ever since the fall last winter, but his mind was as sharp as ever, and his voice still carried that gentle command that made people pause and lean in. Elena greeted him with a warm smile as she filled his water glass and slid a small black coffee in front of him without needing to ask. "Still taking it black and dangerous, Mr. Calden?" she teased. He gave a gravelly chuckle and adjusted his reading glasses. "Only way to stay alive in this world, my dear." She laughed and made to turn, but his voice caught her just before she could escape. "Still playing?" The word stopped her cold. She glanced back, but he hadn't looked up from his folded paper. "Sorry?" "The violin," he said casually, flipping a page. "You haven't brought it in a while. Used to carry the case like it was part of your arm. Haven't seen it lately." Elena forced a tight smile. Oh, that. No, not in a long time. Mr. Calden finally looked up, his eyes soft but perceptive, the kind that saw more than people wanted to reveal. Shame, he said. You had the kind of tone that could hush a room, warm but precise. Your mother's influence, I imagine. Her smile faltered a little at the edges. She didn't talk about her mother much, not even to herself. But Mr. Calden had known her. He'd been her private teacher's colleague once upon a time, and he remembered things, details, the things that stuck like burrs in memory. That life's behind me, she murmured, reaching for her notepad just to have something to do with her hands. The music, the stage, doesn't pay the rent. He nodded, unfazed. So you think? She looked down at him, puzzled. He smiled gently. Music doesn't stop just because we stop playing. It just waits. And the longer it waits, the harder it is to hear. But it never leaves. She didn't respond, just gave a small, polite nod and turned to go. But his words clung to her as she walked back toward the counter, heavier than the trays she carried. Her apron suddenly felt too tight, her shoes too loud against the linoleum. She didn't notice Cole watching her again from across the room. Didn't notice the way his eyes flicked toward Mr. Calden with a faint look of familiarity. Her mind was elsewhere, stuck in the grip of a past that had quietly knocked, just once, to remind her it still existed. The apartment was dark, save for the fractured lamplight spilling across the floor like a spotlight too shy to fully shine. The city murmured outside Elena's window. Tires against pavement, distant voices, the occasional hum of passing sirens. But inside, everything was still. She sat on the edge of her couch, staring at the violin resting in her lap like a question she wasn't sure how to answer. The case lay open beside her, its velvet lining more familiar than her own reflection these days. Her fingers hovered above the strings, unsure, the bow held loosely in her right hand. She hadn't played in years. Not since the day they lowered her mother into the ground, the sound of dirt hitting wood louder than any requiem. She'd told herself music was a luxury, a relic from a life she could no longer afford to believe in. But tonight, something had cracked. Not from the outside, from within. Maybe it was Mr. Calden's voice stirring old echoes, or maybe it was the way that man, Cole, kept watching her like she was more than just a pair of hands balancing trays. Maybe it was the coin still resting in her apron pocket, words etched like prophecy. Value lies in the unseen. Or maybe it was just time. She placed the instrument beneath her chin, awkwardly at first, her muscles resisting, as if they too had forgotten. She adjusted the position, once, twice, until it felt close enough to write. Her fingers found the fingerboard. The bow came down, one long stroke. The sound that emerged wasn't beautiful. It was crooked, splintered, the note fractured at the edges like a photograph left in rain. But it was real. Her eyes stung, but she didn't stop. She played another note, then another, wincing as she adjusted pressure, finding the balance between too much and not enough. She wasn't trying to make it perfect. She was trying to feel. And then, through the discord, a memory slipped through. Warm and sudden. Her mother's voice, soft but insistent. Play like the world is listening, Elena. Not because they are, but because you deserve to be heard. The breath caught in her throat. The bow trembled in her hand, but she kept going. An old melody stirred from her fingers. Something unfinished. A lullaby her mother used to hum when she thought Elena was asleep. It was rusty, raw, but she followed it like a thread in the dark. As she played, the apartment changed. The walls didn't look so narrow. The shadows softened. Her breath slowed. And somewhere beneath the ache in her chest, something opened. Not joy, not yet, but space. Room to remember who she was before grief swallowed her voice. When the last note hung in the air, Elena didn't move. She just sat there, bow still in hand, the violin cradled against her like a secret she'd almost forgotten she owned. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, in a very long time, she didn't feel invisible. The storm rolled in like a living thing, its growl reverberating through the cracked gutters and flickering neon signs outside the diner's fogged windows. Rain whipped against the glass in frantic rhythms, blurring the city into streaks of gray and gold. Most customers had cleared out hours ago, chased away by the downpour and the promise of flooded sidewalks. Inside, the diner felt suspended in time, quiet, dim, almost sacred in its stillness. Elena wiped down the counter slowly, humming without realizing it. The melody had been trapped in her throat all day, aching to escape. Something gentle, melancholic, familiar. Her fingertips tapped absently against the laminate surface as she followed the tune's arc, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it filled the space like a ghost returning home. That was when the bell above the door jingled, sharp against the hush. She looked up, and there he was again. Cole Harrington. His suit jacket was soaked through, hair slicked back in disarray, rainwater trailing down his temples and collar like he'd walked through the storm without even flinching. He looked haunted. Not in the cinematic, brooding way tabloids like to portray powerful men, but in a deeply human way, as if something had chased him into the rain and hadn't let go even now. He didn't wait to be seated this time. He just moved quietly to his usual booth, slid into the seat, and let out a breath like he'd been holding it all day. Elena moved toward him out of instinct, coffee pot in hand, towel tucked into her apron. Her hum had faded the moment he entered, but the echo of it still clung to the air. As she neared his table, Cole's voice rose softly, low, steady, the words shaped with care. Schubert. She blinked, startled. It was the first time he'd ever spoken more than 2 syllables to her. "Sorry?" she asked, stopping short of the table. "The song," he said, eyes meeting hers for the first time that night. Not just glancing, but seeing. "You were humming Schubert. My mother used to play it when she thought no one was listening." Elena didn't answer right away. The moment wrapped itself around her, thick with recognition and something unspoken. "It's an old piece," she said finally, her voice gentler than she meant it to be. "My mother used to hum it too." Cole nodded once, slowly, as if confirming something he hadn't dared believe. The thunder outside cracked loud enough to shake the windows, but neither of them flinched. They just stood there, 2 strangers in a nearly empty diner, bound by a melody that had followed them both through time and loss. She poured his coffee without asking. He didn't look away. When she turned to leave, she felt his eyes linger, not in hunger, but in quiet understanding, as though the storm had finally exposed what silence had been trying to say all along. Elena returned to his table a few minutes later with a fresh pot of coffee, the air between them thick with something unnamed. Not romantic, not flirtatious. Just alert. Like the electricity that lingers in the air after lightning has struck nearby, humming invisibly along every surface. Cole looked up as she approached, not with entitlement or expectation, but with that same unreadable stillness, like she was a painting he didn't understand but couldn't stop looking at. She tried to shake it off, focused on the motion, lift the pot, tilt the wrist, pour steady. "Refill?" she offered, her tone clipped, almost defensive. He nodded, his voice soft. "Please," she poured. He watched. When the mug was full, she moved to turn away, but he spoke again. "Do you still play?" She stiffened, ever so slightly. "Excuse me?" "The violin," he said, voice quieter now, gentler. "The way you hummed. You're not just someone who listens to music. You've played it. You wear it." That last sentence hit harder than she expected, and she didn't know whether to laugh or bristle. Instead, she folded her arms across her apron, leveling him with a look. "I'm not sure what that means, Mr. Harrington." He didn't blink. It means I hear the weight behind your voice. People who've been around music long enough, they carry its shape. You do. She hated how much that affected her, how it reached into her ribcage and pulled something old and half awake into the light. Well, she said, tone flat now, I carry a lot of things. Doesn't mean I have time to use them. Cole nodded slowly, like he'd expected resistance. Fair enough. He didn't push. He didn't compliment her. He didn't ask for more. He just looked at her with a kind of quiet respect she wasn't used to, one that didn't try to fix her or flatter her. It unsettled her more than if he had tried to flirt. She wasn't sure what to make of it, of him. Rich men didn't see waitresses unless they wanted something. But Cole Harrington didn't seem to want anything. Not her number, not her smile, not even his coffee, which he hadn't touched. He just listened. And somehow, that made her feel more naked than if he had reached across the table and touched her hand. She pulled herself together and gave him a polite nod. Let me know if you need anything else. I will, he said, voice low, sincere. Thank you, Elena. Her name on his tongue made her heart flinch. She didn't remember telling him. And yet, somehow, she wasn't surprised that he knew. She turned away before he could see the confusion in her eyes, before he could see the cracks forming in her armor. But as she returned to the counter, she felt his gaze still on her. Not heavy, not invasive, just present. And it stayed there, long after she stopped pretending she didn't feel it. The memory came not like a flood, but like a soft knock in the back of his mind. A door that hadn't opened in years, easing inward on creaking hinges. Cole sat alone in the corner booth, untouched espresso cooling beside him, and let himself drift backward into a silence far older than the one that wrapped around him now. He was 8 years old again, small in the way that made marble floors feel endless beneath bare feet. Wandering the echoing halls of a house that didn't know how to love. The Harrington estate was a palace by any standard. Vaulted ceilings, glass chandeliers, and rooms so pristine they felt like museum exhibits. But it was quiet, too quiet. Conversations were whispered or withheld. Smiles were ceremonial. The only time the house breathed was when his mother played the piano. She never performed for guests, never sought an audience. But late at night, when the staff had vanished and the windows reflected only candlelight and shadows, she would sit at the grand piano in the solarium, her fingers brushing the keys like a prayer. Cole used to lie on the cold marble outside the room, ear pressed to the floor, listening. Schubert, Chopin, Debussy. The music was warm when nothing else was. It reached him in ways her eyes never quite could. She wasn't cruel, just distant, like someone who had trained herself not to need. But in those stolen nights, in those imperfect notes beneath moonlight, Cole could believe she still had pieces of herself she hadn't given away. Then, one winter, the music stopped. She grew ill, slipped into a silence deeper than the ones she used to inhabit. The piano keys gathered dust, and Cole stopped pressing his ear to the floor. There was nothing left to hear. The night she died, no one played anything, not even a hymn. Her funeral was efficient, tasteful, cold. A string quartet was paid to play Vivaldi, but they might as well have been playing static. Cole never returned to the piano. He filled his life with steel and structure, numbers and angles. Buildings didn't need lullabies. He built cities like armor and called it legacy. But every now and then, especially in moments like this, he felt that same ache, that phantom heat of a note never finished. And tonight, when Elena had hummed Schubert while wiping down a counter, it cracked through decades of quiet, like a match struck in the dark. It wasn't just the tune, it was the feeling, the way she carried it, not performed, not embellished, just real. And something inside him, a thing he thought had long since calcified, recognized it instantly, a thread pulled taut across time. That's why he kept coming back, Not to watch her, but to remember himself. Not the billionaire, not the architect, but the boy on the cold marble, listening for a song he'd never expected to hear again. The diner lights flickered once as the storm outside began to ease into a steady drizzle, the thunder now distant and tired, like a tantrum finally spent. Cole sat unmoving in his booth, staring into the darkened window, as if waiting for something to appear in the reflection. A ghost, a memory, maybe even the man he used to be. Elena kept her distance, focusing on refilling sugar caddies and stacking clean mugs, pretending not to notice when he stood and slipped on his coat, still damp at the shoulders. He didn't call her over, didn't ask for the check, didn't offer a parting word, just nodded at George near the register with a quiet familiarity that didn't fit the man's usual icy mystique, then stepped out into the fading rain without looking back. Elena exhaled slowly, unsure whether she felt relieved or oddly hollow. She moved to clear his table, expecting the usual untouched espresso and minimal tip. Cole Harrington didn't leave coins. He left questions. But this time, nestled beneath the salt shaker, perfectly aligned with the edge of the placemat, sat a small, folded rectangle of thick white cardstock. Her fingers hesitated in midair. She didn't need to open it to know what it was. But she did anyway. It was a business card. Clean, elegant, embossed in soft gray letters. Cole Harrington, Harrington Development Group. On the back, a handwritten note in dark ink. If ever you remember who you are. That was all. No number. No promise. Just that line. Elena's heart kicked against her ribs like it was trying to break free. But she clenched her jaw and folded the card shut with more force than was necessary. The words felt like a dare. Or worse, a breadcrumb in a story that didn't belong to her. Seriously? She muttered under her breath, as if he could still hear her. You think this is some kind of, what, fairy tale? Like you're the mysterious stranger who shows up to rescue the sad little waitress from her tragic little life? She stood there another moment, the card burning between her fingers, and then, without ceremony, she dropped it into the trash behind the counter. It landed among crumpled napkins and lemon rinds like it belonged there. Tanya, walking by, raised an eyebrow. What was that? Nothing, Elena said, wiping her hands on her apron. Just garbage, but her voice betrayed her. Not bitter, not angry, just hurt. She didn't want to be anyone's project. Didn't want to be discovered like some street corner miracle. Her life wasn't a broken instrument waiting for the right man to tune it. She was surviving, barely. And no gilded invitation disguised as a business card was going to change that. Not tonight. Not like this. She moved back to her closing duties with more force than finesse, but the air around her felt different now, like the moment after a note ends and silence rushes back in, empty, but also echoing. The next morning dawned gray and reluctant, the kind of overcast sky that made everything feel 2 shades duller than it should. Elena trudged into the diner with sleep still clinging to her bones and a tension in her chest she couldn't shake. She hadn't slept well. Not after the card. Not after the way his voice had lingered in her head. If ever you remember who you are. It was ridiculous, infuriating. She'd thrown it out, hadn't she? Let the garbage truck take it wherever it took all the other remnants of things people didn't want. She tied on her apron in the back room, yawning as she reached into the front pocket for her notepad, and froze. Her fingers wrapped around something smooth, cold, and horribly familiar. She pulled it out slowly, as if afraid it might bite. The token. The same token. The brushed silver glinted dully in the fluorescent light, the same elegant swirling pattern on one side, and on the other, the same engraved phrase, "Value lies in the unseen." Her breath hitched. It couldn't be. She knew she had left it in her apartment, had even checked twice before leaving that morning, as if afraid she might dream it into being. And yet here it was, cool against her palm, as real as the floor beneath her feet. "Well, well," Tanya drawled from across the break room, leaning in with her half-empty cup of coffee. "Somebody's got a secret admirer." Elena quickly tucked the coin back into her apron, her movements a little too sharp. "It's not what you think." "Mm-hmm," Tanya teased. "Guy leaves cryptic notes, stares at you like you're an oil painting, and now you've got mystery tokens appearing out of thin air. You sure you're not starring in some slow-burn romance and forgot to tell the rest of us?" Elena forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. "It's probably just a prank." "From who?" Tanya raised an eyebrow. "The guy who doesn't speak? The man literally built like a Gothic novel protagonist? Come on, Lena. If this was a prank, it's the most expensive-looking one I've ever seen." Elena didn't reply. Her fingers curled tightly around the coin, as if it might offer an explanation if she just held it long enough. But it didn't. It was silent, heavy, and more than a little unnerving. This wasn't a joke. It didn't feel romantic or whimsical or even remotely cute. It felt orchestrated, and somehow personal. Like someone was trying to remind her of something she hadn't agreed to remember. All day, the coin stayed in her pocket, a constant, inescapable weight. Every time she reached for her pen or her order pad, her fingers brushed its surface, and the engraved words echoed louder in her mind. Value lies in the unseen. By the end of her shift, she couldn't tell whether it was a warning, a gift, or a message left by a version of herself she no longer recognized. The bell over the door chimed with its usual half-hearted jingle as Mr. Calden entered, hunched slightly against the cold morning air, his coat flapping in the breeze like tired wings. Elena was wiping down the counter when she saw him, and her chest eased just slightly. He always brought a softness with him, something that dulled the sharpness of the day. She brought him as usual without a word, setting the steaming black coffee down with the grace of ritual. "Morning, Mr. Calden," she said with a smile that didn't feel forced. "You're late." "Late is a relative concept," he replied, settling into his seat. "Besides, good things take time. Bad things are always punctual." He reached into the inner pocket of his worn wool coat and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, thick and sealed, his fingers careful around its edges like it might break. "This is for you," he said, pushing it across the table. Elena blinked. "What is it?" "Open it." His voice was gentle but firm. She hesitated, then peeled the flap open. Inside was a single, professionally printed sheet. At the top, in elegant script, Riverlight Chamber Recital. Autumn Series. Her name was listed on the third line of the evening's program. Elena Graves. Violin soloist. Her stomach dropped. She scanned the rest in disbelief. The venue was real. The date was in 2 weeks. She hadn't signed up. She hadn't even known auditions were open. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked up. I didn't apply for this." Mr. Calden nodded. "I know." "Then why? How?" "Someone heard you," he said simply, folding his hands in front of him. Someone with ears tuned to the kind of sound most people overlook. Her breath caught, the words clinging to her skin like dew. She thought of the night she played, alone in her apartment. The melody, the quiet, the ache. She hadn't told anyone, hadn't performed for anyone. But now, this? Is this a joke? She asked, trying to push back the rising tide of feeling in her chest. "No joke," Calden replied. "Someone remembered what silence costs. And they decided it was time for your music to speak again." She shook her head, lips parting as if to object, but no words came. "I'm not ready," she whispered at last. "I haven't played in years. I don't even know if I can." "You already did," he said, lifting his coffee to his lips. "And someone who understands what it means to listen made sure you were heard." She sat down hard on the edge of the booth, the envelope clutched in her hand like a letter from a former life. The coin in her apron suddenly felt heavier than ever. All around her, The diner moved on. Orders placed, forks scraping plates, Tanya laughing somewhere near the back. But Elena sat still, suspended in the moment, heart thudding with questions and wonder. Someone had heard her, and now the world expected her to answer back. Elena stared at the invitation long after her shift ended, sitting cross-legged on the edge of her mattress, the letter unfolded beside her like a wound. The recital program mocked her with its polished print, her name elegant and out of place among professionals and prodigies. Her breath came shallow, caught somewhere between fury and fear. Who did this? She could guess, could practically see his shadow in the doorway of her thoughts, tall and wordless, with rain still clinging to his coat. Cole Harrington. Of course it was him. Who else had the money, the reach, the gall? Her jaw clenched. Was this some twisted act of pity? A rich man's idea of redemption? Throw the waitress a stage and see what she does with it. The thought made her stomach turn. She imagined him, sipping espresso in his glass tower, satisfied that he'd played savior in someone else's little tragedy. Her pride curled inside her like a fist, bruised and livid. She hadn't asked for help. She hadn't auditioned. She hadn't given anyone the right to put her on display like some forgotten toy plucked from a dusty shelf. Her violin sat in its open case across the room, innocent and unassuming. But she could feel it watching her, feel the air shift around it like the pressure before a storm. The truth, the part that made her angriest, was that some buried, breathless part of her wanted to say yes, wanted to step back into the light, not for him, not for anyone, for herself. That truth burned. She stood abruptly, crossing the room in 2 quick strides. Her hands hovered over the violin, fingers trembling. "Screw him," she muttered, teeth gritted. "Screw charity. Screw fairy tale rescue stories." But she lifted the violin anyway, nestled it beneath her chin, drew the bow across the strings. Once, then again. The first notes were cracked glass, uneven and thin. Her eyes blurred. She tried again. The second stroke was stronger, the note rounder, deeper. Her breath hitched. Again, again, until the melody poured out. Not the Schubert, not some polished concerto, but something raw, improvised, painful, beautiful, her own. Her knees gave out, and she sank to the floor, still playing, tears slipping silently down her cheeks as the music surged from her like it had been caged for years. She didn't play to impress. She didn't play to earn applause. She played because the music inside her wouldn't stay silent any longer, because the little girl in the hand-me-down dress deserved to be heard, because her mother's voice, "Play like the world is listening," still echoed somewhere in the hollow of her ribs, and for the first time in years, she didn't run from it. She let the violin weep and whisper, sing and scream, and when the last note faded and the room returned to stillness, Elena lay back on the worn carpet, breathless, aching, awake, not rescued, not redeemed, just real. Elena didn't tell anyone she'd made the decision. Not in words, anyway. She simply rose the next morning with less hesitation, like her body already knew something her mind was still learning to believe. She taped the recital invitation above her small desk, where unpaid bills used to dominate the space, and placed the violin case beside her nightstand like a sacred object. That afternoon, after another double shift, she didn't collapse onto the couch like usual. Instead, she tied her hair back, tuned her instrument with aching fingers, and played until her fingertips throbbed and the bow left a light burn across her wrist. The calluses came back slowly, small, painful proofs of commitment. Her knuckles ached, her shoulders protested, but she played through it. Not perfectly, not even well some days, but honestly. Scales, etudes, broken arpeggios. She returned to them like old enemies, now met with quiet respect. At the diner, she carried herself differently. Nothing dramatic. Just upright, grounded. The quiet melancholy in her eyes had been replaced by something firmer. Resolve. Maybe. Purpose. Tanya noticed first. "You've got that secret face again," she said one morning, raising an eyebrow as they stocked sugar packets. "Like you're hiding a win." Elena shrugged, but there was the hint of a smile on her lips. "Maybe I remembered something I forgot I had." George saw it too. He offered her the Sunday shifts, her least favorite, expecting the usual grimace, but she just nodded and said, "That's fine." He gave her a long, knowing look, but didn't press. Even customers noticed. Regulars who never bothered with eye contact now asked her name. An elderly woman at table 5 told her she had stage posture. One teenager asked if she was a dancer. She laughed, quietly, but inside, something stood a little taller. One night, while bussing tables near closing, she overheard a customer say, "She's just a waitress," and for the first time, she didn't flinch. She didn't let the phrase sink its claws into her. She didn't even correct it. She simply kept moving, the same way a concert musician might ignore a cough from the audience. Acknowledging that noise, too, was part of the performance. When she returned home that night, she played the opening bars of her recital piece 3 times in a row, fingers faltering, breath catching. On the 4th attempt, something clicked. Not perfection, but clarity. This wasn't about proving herself anymore. Not to Cole Harrington, not to her mother's memory, not to the world that had buried her under bills and silence. This was about reclaiming her voice, note by note, blister by blister. In the quiet of her apartment, as the city roared on outside, Elena let the music carve out her place again. And though no one applauded and no spotlight shone, she stood straighter. Not just a waitress, not anymore. The days blurred into a rhythm all their own, like a symphony built from the ordinary. Elena's life became a delicate choreography of shifts and scales, of mop buckets and metronomes, of aching feet and aching fingers. Mornings began early, black coffee in one hand, violin in the other. As she practiced with the kind of dedication that didn't chase applause but chased truth, every bow stroke was a confrontation with doubt, every note a negotiation between fatigue and desire. Her fingertips, raw and split from long hours, slowly built their armor back. The violin no longer felt foreign in her hands. It was becoming an extension of her again, not flawless, but honest. Even her body remembered how to lean, how to breathe, how to anchor herself to sound. At the diner, she worked the same grueling hours, but her presence began to shift. It wasn't something people could name, not exactly, but they felt it. She moved with more intention, spoke with more clarity. She no longer ducked behind self-deprecation or shrank under compliments. When someone asked how she was, she didn't shrug. She said, "Working on something," and she meant it. Mr. Calden became her quiet anchor. He began stopping by not just for coffee, but to listen, sometimes giving her exercises scrawled on napkins, sometimes offering corrections in his gentle but firm tone. "Let the bow float there," he'd say. "You're rushing the breath between notes. Trust the silence, too." They'd meet after her shift, once the diner had dimmed and the floors were clean. She'd play in the back booth, behind drawn blinds, the smells of bacon grease still lingering in the air, and he'd tap the table along with the rhythm. "It's not about being perfect," he told her one night. "It's about being undeniable." Slowly, she began to understand what he meant. It wasn't her technique that was changing. It was her relationship to the music. She no longer feared the audience. She wasn't trying to escape her life through sound. She was building a bridge back into it. The violin wasn't her escape route. It was her arrival point. Even her co-workers began to see it. Tanya, watching Elena stretch her wrist one night after playing a tricky passage near the dishwasher, handed her an ice pack with a half smile. "You're becoming a whole damn story," she said. You know that? Elena smiled back, flushed and tired and alive. I think I always was, she replied. The transformation wasn't in her clothes or her makeup. There was no makeover montage, no designer dress. But her eyes had depth now, and her posture sang long before her violin did. People began responding to her differently, more attentively, more respectfully. But she wasn't performing for them. This wasn't about being seen. This was about seeing herself. And as the recital date crept closer, Elena didn't grow more afraid. She grew more certain. Not that she would be perfect, but that she belonged. The backstage air was dense with nerves and rosin dust, the smell of old wood and fresh anticipation hanging heavy as Elena stood just off the curtain line, violin clutched to her chest like a shield and a compass all at once. Her hands trembled, not from fear exactly, but from the pressure of knowing this mattered, not to anyone else, but to herself. She peeked past the velvet and caught a glimpse of the audience, rows upon rows of dim silhouettes, an ocean of waiting breath. Somewhere out there, among the quiet rustle of programs and shifting knees, she felt him. Not saw. Felt. Cole Harrington. She hadn't heard from him since the card. No more visits to the diner. No more silent conversations. But something inside her said he was here. Then the stagehand gave the nod, and the world narrowed to a tunnel of light. She stepped out. The lights hit her instantly. Hot, blinding, erasing the crowd into a blur of shadows. Her heart pounded like a timpani beneath her ribs. The applause as her name was announced sounded far away, muffled by the rush of blood in her ears. She walked to the center of the stage, the silence swallowing everything as she took her stance, bow in hand, chin down, breath in. Then, nothing. For a moment, the fear almost won. Her fingers stiffened. Her mind threatened to go blank. The world teetered. But then her mother's voice returned, as soft as wind through curtains. Play like the world is listening. So she did. One note, then another, thin at first, tentative, but each one bolder than the last. She didn't aim for brilliance. She aimed for truth. Her bow danced slowly, rising and falling like breath, and the melody bloomed, aching and luminous, a story told in vibrato and silence. She let the imperfections stay, didn't smooth them away. They were part of her. The scraped edges, the cracked beauty, the pause before a crescendo where memory clung tight. She was not Elena the waitress now, nor the child prodigy of a mother long buried. She was simply Elena, standing inside the music, letting it speak for all the years she'd stayed quiet. Somewhere in the crowd, a throat cleared, a chair creaked, and then, nothing but stillness. Not even a cough. She had them, all of them. And when the final note hung trembling in the air before falling gently into silence, she let it go with a softness that brought tears to her own eyes. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then, thunder. The audience rose to its feet. Applause burst forward like light through glass. Wild and unrestrained. She blinked against the lights, dazed, clutching her violin like it might dissolve. Her eyes scanned the crowd. And there, in the very back, half-shadowed near the exit, stood Cole. Not clapping, not moving, just watching. His expression unreadable, except for the glint of moisture in his eyes. Silent, unmistakable proof that something inside him had broken open, just like something inside her had finally been made whole. The cool night air hit Elena's flushed skin like a balm as she stepped outside the recital hall, the low hum of conversation and congratulatory embraces echoing behind her like the afterglow of a dream. Her violin case hung at her side, lighter somehow, as if the weight it had carried for years had lifted note by note during her performance. She hadn't stayed to bask in praise, didn't linger for interviews or flowers. She needed space, stillness, a breath. She walked down the front steps, her heels clicking softly on the stone, and there, half in shadow, leaning casually against a street lamp, like he hadn't been standing in the back row, watching her tear herself open with sound, stood Cole Harrington. No suit tonight. Just a dark coat, simple slacks, hair windswept in that accidental way rich men always managed. His hands were in his pockets, but his eyes met hers without hesitation. No smirk, no smugness, just something rawer, cleaner. A man stripped of his mask. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The street around them buzzed with soft city noise. Passing cars, distant laughter. But they stood in their own silence, charged and familiar. Finally, he stepped forward. "Thank you," he said, voice low, steady, but not rehearsed. "For what you played." She raised an eyebrow, exhausted but grounded. "You don't have to flatter me." He shook his head. "I'm not. I'm grateful. You reminded me I still feel things." She studied him for a long moment, searching for the angle, the catch, but there wasn't one. Just a man who looked like he'd spent years trying not to feel anything at all, and who had finally failed. And somehow, that failure looked like grace. She didn't smile, didn't flinch, just answered with quiet certainty. "And you reminded me, I still can." The words hung there, unadorned, true. He nodded once, slow. A faint breeze caught the hem of his coat. "I didn't arrange the recital," he said, almost sheepishly. "Not entirely." She tilted her head. "But you nudged it." He hesitated. "I asked a friend to listen, that's all." She considered this, then nodded slowly, accepting it, not as a favor, but as a sign. "Well," she said, "I heard me too." Another long silence. But this one didn't ache. It simply existed, gentle and respectful. Finally, Cole stepped back. "I'll leave you to your moment," he said. "You earned it." "So did you," she replied softly. He looked surprised, almost moved. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. No fanfare, no invitation, no lingering gaze. Just a man, vanishing into the night like a page turned. Elena stood there for a moment longer, violin in hand, the stars beginning to pierce the sky above. She didn't chase him. She didn't need to. Something had been exchanged between them tonight. Something more lasting than phone numbers or promises. Two lives intersecting briefly, honestly, and then moving forward, whole. The next morning, the city woke slowly under a quilt of early autumn haze, and Elena walked through it with a sense of stillness she hadn't known in years. Not peace exactly. Peace was too clean a word. But presence. She felt grounded in her skin now, like the music had stitched her back into herself. The coin, the token, rested in her apron pocket again. She had found it there this morning without surprise, as if it had always known when to appear. And now, as the bell above the diner's door chimed in its usual off-key way, and Cole Harrington stepped inside one last time, she felt no tremor of nerves, no flutters, just calm. He was dressed casually again, his expression neutral but open, the lines around his eyes softened by whatever it was her music had stirred in him. He slid into his old booth without ceremony, as if no time had passed, and she approached with steady steps, a small object wrapped in her closed fist. No coffee, no notepad. Just her. "You forgot something," she said quietly. He looked up, puzzled, then watched as she extended her hand and dropped the silver token into his palm. It glinted briefly in the light, familiar now, the swirling pattern, the quiet message. Value lies in the unseen. His fingers curled around it slowly, as if the metal held heat. "I didn't think I'd see that again," he murmured. "I thought maybe it was yours now." She shook her head gently. "I think it always belonged to you." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, the air between them hummed with something that wasn't desire or longing, or even connection in the traditional sense. It was recognition. Two people who had touched something in each other they weren't supposed to lose. "Whatever you saw in me," she said, her voice clear but soft, "find it in yourself too." Cole didn't answer right away. He simply stared at the token like it was a mirror he hadn't dared look into. Then he nodded. Not in agreement, but in gratitude. Deep, wordless, real. No offers were made. No promises exchanged. No cinematic kiss or grand invitation. Just two people who had helped each other remember what they had been trying to forget for too long. That pain doesn't cancel out beauty, and that music, like meaning, often hides in the quietest places. She tucked her apron string behind her back, ready to turn and return to her day, but he spoke once more before she left. "Thank you, Elena." Her name and his voice sounded like closure, or maybe like a door opening. She gave a faint smile. "Don't forget to listen." And with that, she walked away, not into his world, but back into her own. One she now claimed fully, with eyes open and heart tuned. Behind her, Cole sat in the booth, staring at the token in his hand like it might teach him how to begin. Sometimes, a stranger doesn't walk into your life to rescue you. They don't sweep you off your feet or rewrite your story with grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes, they just sit quietly in the corner, watching not out of desire, but recognition. They don't give you anything you didn't already have. They simply hold up a mirror, polished by their own ache, and let you see what's been buried beneath the weight of surviving. Elena didn't need saving. What she needed was space. Space to hear her own voice again, trembling but true. To remember that the calluses on her fingers were not just marks of labor, but of craft. That her silence was not emptiness, but a pause waiting for the next note. And Cole, he wasn't a hero, or a patron, or even a mystery. He was a man who had forgotten how to feel, until someone else's quiet grace reminded him that feeling wasn't weakness. It was proof that something inside was still alive. Their lives didn't merge into one. No fairy tale ending, no white horse, just a shared glance in a moment of transformation, and then the dignity of parting, changed, not completed. Because some people come into our lives not to stay, but to awaken. And when they do, it isn't about them. It's about what they reveal. So the question lingers, long after the chairs are stacked, and the lights are turned off, and the music fades. What quiet power in you is waiting to be seen? What note are you holding back? What truth have you left buried beneath someone else's expectations? What mirror are you afraid to look into? Because maybe it's not about being chosen. Maybe it's about choosing yourself. And maybe, just maybe, the world is waiting for the sound only you can make. If this story stirred something in you, made you pause, reflect, or remember a part of yourself you've been quieting, don't forget to like this video. It helps us keep sharing stories that speak to the unseen strength in all of us. Make sure you're subscribed and tap the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter in someone's unexpected journey. And if you know someone who's been doubting their worth, their talent, or their timing, share this with them. Sometimes, all it takes is one glance, one song, or one shift in perspective to realize you were never lost, just waiting to be heard. Thank you for being here.